during rainfall and things like that. So it's sort of all over the board. But what I'm trying to do is say, okay, pre or post, and then usually as a first shot, I'll say, okay, primarily grass or primarily broadleaf, right, control, because that puts you in some categories. Now, herbicides cross over, right? You've got herbicides that cross over that category. And then, because all these contests, typically you've got the most, the corn and soybean herbicides represent the majority of the herbicides here. So I'm going to probably go straight to the corn and beans and take a look and see which survived, right? Neither one of them survives, and that puts me in a different category, right? Which you need to know. I mean, you need to know, of course, in these plots, probably the 5 herbicides or something like that for which, neither one of those will survive. And there's no Liberty Link or Roundup Ready corn or beans, right? Is that right? It's all sensitive. So it's all sensitive. So if you have a Liberty plot or Roundup plot, you should see dead, corn and soybeans. So that's kind of...
But is that true for the contest?
Yeah,
If they plant a Roundup Ready or Liberty Link or some kind of
they'll tell you.
Crop, they will sign it and say that it is genetically modified.
Right.
And if you're not sure, ask the proctor and they'll specify.
Right. And I'm one of the proctors, so
yeah.
For this.
Just on this one, we already had established beans, and we sprayed out into those beans with each one of our treatments. So
okay.
It's just a bonus row where you see a little bit of extra damage.
And so if they do plant one of those, and that's just another hint for you looking at it, because you could say, okay, well,
Like a big sign.
yeah, it is. It actually, yeah, it is. So that's sort of my thinking, right? When I come into a plot, and then after that, the next thing I'm going to look at is I'm going to look, if I don't see it in the plot for the post-emergence, the pre, it's hard to tell. You're not going to really see injury symptoms typically, although what they do sometimes, Classic, for example, causes bottle brush roots on corn, right? So this is a Classic plot, this is not a typical Classic plot. The first rate and the Classic I don't think are typical here, but so Classic's not a corn herbicide, which you see the corn survived there, and that's just for whatever reason. And sometimes what they'll do, I don't know if they've done this recently, is they'll have a bucket of water with a corn root in there, right? And you're looking for the bottle brush roots from the ALS inhibitor, right? Which would be indicative of Classic. So they don't want everybody pulling up corn and trying to do it on their own. And that's also a giveaway if you see a corn plant in some water, right? And then on the post, I'm going to start looking for symptomology right off, like if I see bleaching, right? And it, depending on how long it's been on and how fast the weeds died, this is kind of an unusual plot because I walked down here the other day and there is not a lot of symptomology here, even on the edges. It's actually fairly phenomenal, I think. There's a couple places it is, but there are plenty of these plots where, for example, on the dicamba and the glyphosate and the gramoxone and things like that, it may have annihilated or you may not see any symptom because things are dead enough and it worked. But somewhere right in that check strip that goes between, like, glyphosate, you're looking for some yellowing or something like that, versus gramoxone, you're looking for some spotting, right? So that's sort of my thought train. So, and then that puts you in the next category of, oh, I see bleaching, right? Or I see this, or I've walked into the plot and everything's dead just about. And I think, okay, it's Liberty, or it's, glufosinate, or gramoxone, or paraquat or glyphosate. And then I'm starting to look for hints like, okay, is there, speckling, or is there some of that kind of whitish that happens with glufosinate? So that's sort of my thinking. And then after that, you really need to know the key differences that separate a couple herbicides. So hopefully that'll put you in the right rough category of group of, 3 to 5 herbicides, right? And after that, you're going to have to know, like, this herbicide leaves corn, this herbicide leaves canola, right? That's where sort of memorizing that spectrum of control, or at least the key differences between things is going to get you to the next step, right? And that's the hardest step, I think, at that point. As I said, these pre's I don't necessarily are necessarily typical. I'll point out some symptomology as we go down through here, but mostly what I'm going to focus on is just some general stuff on what the spectrum of control is, what type of herbicide it is, right? So these first, and they're grouped by site of action here, or mode of action anyway, right? So then you're trying to tell the difference. So these first two are Classic and First Rate, which are, why do we have trade names on here if it's
just for that the spray sheet.
Okay.
The study sheets don't have it.
So Clemuron and Claransalam, right? First two. ALS inhibitors. Pre-emergence, you'll come out and I don't know that you'll see a lot of symptomology. Both Clemuron's more known for the bottle brush on roots. I'm not sure Claransalam causes it as much. You can see they're basically both soybean herbicides.
Walk through, like
So, I mean, if you're looking, so you look at these plots and you basically see the first rate's really atypical. So the classic's a broadleaf herbicide, right? So what you should see typically is most of your grasses left, and it's pretty broad spectrum on broadleaves. It left the velvet leaf, I think, which is a little unusual for it. This is not an atypical. What's interesting between these two plots is the first rate looks a lot better than the Climmeron, which is I think a little bit off. But you come up here and the corn in the Climmeron, you can't really see any injury. You can see a little bit, like you look at the Clansalam, it looks like it's been stunted a little bit. And then you look at the beans and it's safe, right? So you're thinking, okay, soybean herbicide. And then you're back off and you're looking for spectrum. And between the two of these classic or Climmeron's pretty broad spectrum. Neither one of them should control grasses, which is why that's a really weird plot. I've never seen Clansalam Hardy give any grass activity, but you got it there. Odd things happen, but neither one of them have much activity on grasses. They're pretty good activity on pigweed, lamb's quarter, velvet leaf. There should be some from the Climmeron even on the Morning Glory. It almost looks like you guys sprayed the classic over there on top of the first rate here. But I mean, these should be more similar, where you see sort of that stunning and that suppression of the Morning Glory right there, right? They're about 70% herbicides on Morning Glory. So, that's typical for that, where you see them come up. And that is the one weed in these two plots where these two herbicides on a pre that you'll come up and you'll see that symptomology of that sort of yellowing, like right here, right? That sort of distortion, like kind of hunkered down and a little bit yellow. So you're looking for that on the Morning Glory. That is a key thing to help you out, I think there. I'm trying to think of what other weeds we have, but they're pretty broad spectrum. They put a lot of rain on either one of these, they'll work actually really well. And then beyond that, you're going to have to know sort of the difference in what is that, pea? What is that next thing over there? Some of the other minor crops here, which I can't recall some of the differences in spectrum.
There's a huge difference, obviously, in sunflower.
Yeah, right. But again, I think Climmeron activity is low here. I don't quite get it. You've got the Clansalam way better on giant ragweed, which is not typical. So I think this is a little bit atypical. I would expect these to look a little bit more similar, right, than they do right here. And then, yeah, if you've got some key differences over time on a couple key species, you're going to have to sort of zero in on them, right? But I'd be really surprised if you see Clansalam do this. This is unusual for Clansalam. So have you ever seen it do that before?
Not that good.
I don't know what happened there really. So, okay, all right. Questions about that? The other root inhibitor you do have here, although they may not show you, is the next plot. The pendimethalin can actually cause a little bit of clubbing on corn roots too, but it's usually safe. It's a corn and soybean herbicide, right? So depending on how they apply it, if they have plants out of the water for both the pendimethalin and one other plot, the Climmeron will be that bottle brushing, that classic bottle brushing thing, and the pendimethalin will be more sort of a clubbed, like a swollen clubbed root tip, right? So if they do happen to have both of those in water for whatever reason, that's what you're looking for the difference. And those are the only two root inhibitors in the group, right? So you may see corn symptomology, but you won't see anything with roots. So we can move down. Pendimethalin's labeled on a lot of different crops, right? It's pretty safe on a lot of different ones, so that's why you see kind of a lot of stuff surviving here. The basic is it is a corn and soybean herbicide, so you see they're safe here. Controls grasses, controls velvet or lamb's quarter pigweed, and after that it falls off pretty rapidly. You can see a little bit. You see the slight depression in the velvet leaf, right? So it's got a little bit of activity on velvet leaf, and you can see like they're a little bit shorter. You may see that. Shouldn't have much on morning glory, ragweeds. Should be like water. Shouldn't really be anything on nutsedge, but you should have pretty broad spectrum activity on grasses. And then you can see, what is that, sorghum?
Yep.
Sorghum surviving.
Canola's fine.
Canola's okay.
Sunflower's good. Pumpkin's good.
Right. So, yeah. I'm trying to think of some other symptomology you might see, and you may see some. In terms of grass activity, so it's primarily thought of as a grass herbicide, so you're going to come down to the other two or three primarily grass herbicides here, which could be Command, Clomazone, the Dual 2, and the Zidua, the Metolachlor, and the pyroxasulfone. So the difference would be this one should have more broadleaf activity than either the Metolachlor or the pyroxasulfone, right? Neither one of those two should do much on velvet leaf. What else? I'm trying to think of what else. I can't remember historically the other things in the spectrum that differentiate those two. The clomazone, the command, doesn't control pigweed, right? So that's a key thing for you. Also should have some activity on the corn. We'll see if it does when we get down there, right? So I think if you're looking at something that's primarily grass control and the corn and soybeans lived, and you're looking at it thinking, man, it's pretty safe on a bunch of stuff here, pendimethalin might be your bet. So these next three, I haven't worked with Carmex really much, so I don't have a good handle on, was that Diaron? Diaron. These three, especially, and I know the atrazine and the metribuzin, they can look like scorched earth, bare ground sometimes, like under like a lot of rain. Sometimes and you look at it and you think, man, everything's gone. And then other times it looks more like this, where you start to see some of the differences come through, right? And then of course you're looking at the corn and soybeans. So you've got the atrazine plot here where the corn's safe and the soybeans, they're there and they're small. So you may look at it and think, well, the soybeans are there, so that can't be atrazine, but actually soybeans live through atrazine and are stunted and kind of get hammered pretty frequently, right? So they may still be there, and I think they are.
Yeah, there's a couple.
Yeah. So if you, and again, you may see a little bit of symptomology, but it's been pretty long, so probably not. But you can see a couple survived, and they're pretty small. Whereas the metribuzin, next plot down, right? See, the beans are fine. Metribuzin actually is labeled for corn, so the corn's fine. They both took out the canola. They're both pretty safe on sorghum. And then you get into some of the other differences, and what it should look like is textbook that the atrazine should give you more grass activity than the metribuzin does, right? Metribuzin can actually give you a lot of grass activity at times. Atrazine is just generally broader spectrum on broadleaf. So in terms of morning glory, any of the tougher broadleaves, cocklebur, ragweed should be better. Metribuzin, it has some grass suppression, controls lamb's quarter, pigweed, doesn't control morning glory. Yeah, kind of a 50% herbicide on velvet leaf and the other tough broadleaves, right? So if you're looking at the two, aside from the soybeans trying to tell the difference, and one of them's got just better grass, just overall better broadleaf control, that's typically going to be the atrazine, right? But you can see, for example, the morning glory. The atrazine did a pretty good job at suppressing this natural morning glory population and the ragweed, really. And the metribuzin over there, you see way more ragweed and lots of morning glory. But still, that's a lot of activity for metribuzin, I think. And then the next one down is a Diaron, and I still do not have a real good handle on Diaron. So you're going to have to rely sort of on the notes in the past, whatever you have in your history there to kind of differentiate. I don't know, you want to say anything about Diaron, Bruce?
No.
It's a herbicide. It's got a variety of uses depending on rate. It's used in industrial situations, and at lower rates it's used in other type of situations. It used to be used in alfalfa, right? So is alfalfa one of the species?
Yeah.
If you see alfalfa survive, seedling alfalfa, that may be the Diaron. Aside from that, you're going to have to rely on your past notes, I think. But at low rates, you can see a lot of stuff does survive in it, and their rate actually is probably fairly low for that herbicide. So, and those are photosynthesis inhibitors. Clomazone is unique here in the pre-emergence. It's a pigment inhibitor. You can occasionally see from this, especially on some of the broadleaf species that are a little bit somewhat sensitive to it, you may see some white. So if you're looking at any of the pre-plots and you see a weed on the edge or something like that that's got bleaching, that's clomazone. It's the only bleacher in that list of 10, so that is one of your giveaways. It's a soybean herbicide, but we've actually played around with low rates on corn, and it can be safe on corn. So what you may see from the corn is you may see some corn plants that are up in white, right? Bleached leaves. You may see that, and then you may see something that looks like that. But that would be your other giveaway looking at these plots. If you look at a plot, soybeans are fine. Mostly grass is taken out. The velvet leaf's all gone. The pigweed is largely left. Can you see all the pigweed in here for the clomazone? And that's one of the differences between beclomazone and the pendimethalin and the metolachlor and the pyroxasulfone is there should be pigweed left in the clomazone plot, and there really shouldn't be pigweed left in the other three, okay? If you see any bleached corn though, that's clomazone. Doesn't get morning glory, stellar on velvet leaf, good on lamb's quarter, and a good grass herbicide, better grass herbicide than pendimethalin really. And safe on pumpkins. You can see here it's safe on the sunflower, safe on the canola, looks like. Yeah, so. All right. The flumioxazin number 8, the Valor, is actually kind of unique in here too. It's a PPO inhibitor. You typically, when it's used pre-emergence, when PPO inhibitors are used pre-emergence, you won't see any symptomology. That's my experience. You'll have to rely almost exclusively on your spectrum. It is labeled for both corn and beans, right? It's got some grass activity. It's a little bit like metribuzin. You can actually see it suppress grasses pretty well, but you see a bunch of small ones coming through. It's not as good as the Command or the metolachlor or the pyroxasulfone. Got some activity on morning glory, generally good on pigweed, lamb's quarter, pretty good on velvet leaf. Trying to think of what else will differentiate it.
Stunted the pumpkins and the sunflower, but didn't kill them.
Okay, there you go. Stunted the sunflowers
And pumpkins.
and the pumpkins.
Wiped out the canola.
Right. So, I'm trying to think of what you would confuse it with. Probably the metribuzin, possibly. And the metribuzin being weak on morning glory and weak on velvet leaf, typically. So, okay. And these last two, hopefully there's a couple key species here. So these are both seedling shoot inhibitors, right? So they're primarily grass herbicides with some broadleaf activity. So you got metolachlor and you got pyroxasulfone. The differences, both good on grass, both good on pigweed. The pyroxasulfone's better on lamb's quarter, right? So metolachlor is sort of a 40-50% herbicide on lamb's quarter, and pyroxasulfone's more like a 80 to 100%, right? And then you see the difference in the velvet leaf. So if you're looking at the differences here, see the velvet leaf's got that suppression again. At least there's some activity on it. Has a little bit of activity on common ragweed. Is that one of the indicators?
Yeah.
Common ragweed, so that'd be another key thing where common ragweed should come flying through the metolachlor fine. And if you look at this, the pyroxasulfone, and you see suppression sort of like that of common ragweed, that's a giveaway. Pyroxasulfone, generally you can see it's a little bit, there's a little bit less morning glory in there. And then they're both safe on corn and beans. Like the canola lived. These two species are kind of the same. So that could be a tough. Those could be tough to differentiate if they give you both of them. I would key in on more broadleaf activity out of the pyroxasulfone. So if you're looking at it thinking, I don't think metolachlor really is that good, I would probably shift it up to the pyroxasulfone. Okay. All right. Questions about any of that? All right. Then we get into the post where you start to symptomology becomes a little bit more important, and I think for me it becomes easier. I think the differentiation of the pre I think is harder than the post. But and you got a couple posts that are really easy, right? Depending on how I get there late that day, so if they've already picked the plots, I don't have any say, but they may throw you a bone and give you the cethoxidime. It's the only grass post grass herbicide. So if you look at a plot, the grass is dead and all the broadleaves are unaffected. The only herbicide on this list really that'll do that is a cethoxidime, right? The other key, probably too hard to tell, but because this is everything kind of died here. But I mean, if you they probably don't, I don't know what this philosophy will be on that, but have they pulled this out before and had it visible or anything? So if they have anything in water that looks like this with a rotted growing point, that's the cethoxidime, okay? Because what it does is go down there and mess up cell wall and production down in there. You can try the same thing with any grasses that are left there if they're sort of half dead. Again, I don't know what the philosophy will be on allowing people to do that, because the first groups through will take out all the grass. But if you do see some grass and you can pull out a dead one, you can see the same type of thing. Grass is sort of all wilted here, but I don't think it's that tough. It's probably one of the easier ones to identify. So, you got 2 ALS inhibitors. You have the Permit, and then the Pursuit. So this is halosulfuron, and then imazethapure. You can see if you've got it down to symptomology and you're trying to tell the difference between the two, you can see that halosulfuron doesn't give you any grass control at all. Halosulfuron's claim to fame is yellow nutsedge control, among other things. Mrs. Lamb's Quarter should be pretty good on pigweed, velvet leaf. Should have hammered the beans, and then should be safe on the corn, right? And then coming over to the imazethapure. Imazethapure is across the board pretty good on grasses and pretty good on broadleaves. You can see it actually did injure the soybeans here, which is Pursuit's imazethapure is usually pretty gentle on beans, so I'd err more on the side of probably not seeing that. In the corn, it can be all over the board, so you can spray imazethapure on corn and not see hardly any symptomology, and then you may see this. Keep it in mind, it's an ALS inhibitor, it's a amino acid synthesis inhibitor, so what both of these do is kind of stop plant growth like glyphosate does. You can see some yellowing. Morning Glory is a really good giveaway for me on these 2 herbicides. You see how it's kind of wrinkled up? So they won't kill it all necessarily, but it's wrinkled and sitting there and yellowish, and that's a really nice giveaway. Like this type of symptomology. See that? Kind of, and they will cause a little bit of growth distortion. So if you see that, that's a pretty good giveaway. I think you're looking at an ALS inhibitor. I'm trying to think of what else here would cause that type of symptomology, and nothing else really should. In terms of what else you could confuse them with, Basagran could be a challenge, possibly with a Permit. Basagran's also good on yellow nutsedge, doesn't control grasses, although it does control barnyard grass to some extent. So if you're trying to compare that with a halosulfuron, that may be a little bit of a challenge. The Basagran's labeled on a lot of different crops too, so what you may see is the halosulfuron here like annihilated the canola, was pretty hard on the pumpkins, and the Benazon, the Basagran may be gentler. We'll see when we get there. So, and you can see also the halosulfuron pretty much left the sorghum untouched, and the imazethapure hammered the sorghum here too. But you see these type of wrinkled, this is like seedling growth inhibitor, amino acid synthesis inhibitor, growth suppression, so you can get this kind of wrinkling and distortion again on, so that's kind of what you're looking for with these. I think the halosulfuron should have caused some of that same type of thing.
It's because sunflower is just so much closer to green.
Yeah. Pursuits, and the imazethapure is another one that can be all over the board, but a giveaway for both of these is neither one of them is very good on lamb's quarter. That one's like water on lamb's quarter. The imazethapure actually has some activity, so you may see them sort of suppressed and trying to outgrow it. I think of what else here. That's probably about it. But I mean, you can see the stark difference in the grass, and then I think you're looking for some symptomology like this, and you're looking at the corn. But I think what you're likely to see with the corn, in a lot of cases, I think what we've seen in the past is it's 30% reduced in height, not a lot of symptomology necessarily, kind of all over the board. Right? Okay. And the next 2 can be a real challenge. So I'm going to stand right in the middle between the 2. So you got 2,4-D and then Clarity. They're both growth regulators. So in theory, somewhere in here you should see some of this kind of distorted, right, epinasty sort of things turned upside down and that type of thing. Again, it depends how long they've been on and how fast things died. The challenge is really telling the difference between the 2. They're both good across the board pretty much on broadleaves. I can't remember in our database. What you see here though is 2,4 or dicamba can be a little bit weak on velvet leaf, and velvet leaf can be a really nice giveaway on symptomology. So here the 2,4-D pretty much took out the velvet leaf. There's a little bit, no it didn't, I'm lying. It's in there and it's small, but if you look at the difference in the velvet leaf here, because what you're looking for, if you can't figure it out any other way, is dicamba should cause more of a, let's see, this, like right now, having said this, they can both cause some of this, but this cupping where the edge of the leaves sort of go like that is more of a dicamba symptom, and then what 2,4-D in some cases causes a little bit more of an elongation and a strapping. So if you're like looking at the plot thinking, I know it's one of them, and you come to the edge of the plot, and the velvet leaf did survive the dicamba a little bit better than it survived the 2,4-D. If you come to the edge and you see that, go with dicamba, right? You can see it in the beans depending on what's going on. I don't remember that difference either. The soybeans, let's see. Yeah, here we go. So, and this is one with a dicamba. You want to look on the edge. See that? Is that from the? That's from the dicamba still, right? Yeah. So there's your cupping, right, on the soybean leaves, right? So the 2,4-D is a little bit all over the board on symptomology, but not typically sort of that textbook type of cupping. I'm trying to see what we got here. 2,4-D just kind of hammered the soybeans more here. So I don't know what else to tell you except that in the database whether there's a couple other key differences in control. They may go with 2,4-D just so they don't have dicamba drifting through their whole plot causing problems. So that's the other thing, is if you don't see any cupping and you're thinking, okay, it's hot in North Carolina, they don't need to have dicamba moving everywhere, they probably went with 2,4-D. That'd be my guess, but you know, depending on how much heat stroke I had and how badly I wanted to get out of the plot. So, all right. Drive, I don't know drive. I forget, what's the common name on 16?
Quickwork.
Yeah, it's a, I know it's used in turf for crabgrass control, right? I think. I don't know.
For turf?
Is it in dimension?
I'm very confused by the fact that it's labeled for turf, but it says it controls grasses. Could you explain that?
Well, it has a very specific, I mean, it controls crabgrass for whatever reason, but doesn't injure turf.
Crabgrass. It
Yeah,
doesn't control
yeah, that's
grasses,
just
period.
that's just a selectivity thing. Cool. I don't know. You're gonna have to look at our past history on this one. What's the site of action of? Is quinclorac a growth regulator? Yeah.
What's that, kid?
Quinclorac is a growth regulator. You see some of those same type of symptoms here. So again, but it's not primarily a broadleaf herbicide. So if you're looking at these symptomologies with a cupping and sort of that type of thing, and you see a bunch of broadleafs living and the grass is at least suppressed, like I said, it's claimed to fame as crabgrass control. Is that one of the weeds out here?
Yeah.
So if you see the other grasses living and the crabgrass gone, and you see the growth regulator symptomology, and you're looking and thinking, what the heck? You know, that'd be my guess, would be the drive. I don't know how else to kind of get you into that category. Yeah, so it's probably not that tough if you know those few things about it, I guess.
Yeah, it's a French one.
Okay. All right. Okay. So benazon's a photosynthesis inhibitor, but it doesn't typically cause the same sort of classic photosynthesis inhibitor symptoms. This is actually a good benazon plot, except that it's, is this benazon? Is this 17?
Yeah.
So except that benazon's safe on both corn and beans, and I think we just had a low corn stand there. So you shouldn't see hardly any symptomology, although you can see a little bit here if that's what that is. You can see a little bit of symptomology, photosynthesis type inhibitor on beans, and it's not necessarily the speckling burning you get from like the fomesaphine here. It's more of a sort of an overall kind of bronzing with some kind of moving to the leaf tip a little bit. No grass control, except can have activity on barnyard grass. Doesn't control morning glory, doesn't control pigweed. Kind of so-so on lamb's quarter, good on velvet leaf, and nutsedge again is one of its claims to fame. It's labeled on a lot of different crops. Looks like I took out the canola here, but if you see something that's general on some of the other minor crops, that could be benazon, although it's broadleaf herbicide. So I'm trying to think what you'd confuse it with. We talked about the halosulfuron, right? The benazon cause any of those same like growth amino acid synthesis inhibitor symptoms, right? Because it'll basically be more of it's a contact herbicide. So you could actually look at the halosulfuron and the benazine and say, okay, I know it's one of those. They both controlled nut sedge. You should see better activity on lamb's quarter out of the benazine than the halosulfuron really is like water on lamb's quarter. And then the halosulfuron, of course, will hammer the soybeans, right? So that'd be your other key difference. So, but you may see if you look at that, just kind of standing back a little bit and think about that halosulfuron plot, except for the beans, they look pretty similar. So that could be a little bit of a challenge. All right. There's a bunch of herbicides here that I thought had a lot of activity, right? And in this contest historically, and looking at all the plots that we've done, the study plots, it can be a challenge to differentiating between glyphosate, glufosinate, and paraquat, right? And actually the Armazon here, the topramazone, looks kind of annihilated things too, but there's some good symptomology. So in some cases, I mean, obviously for this glyphosate, you've got glyphosate-resistant canola, right? Is that what they typically do?
That's what we have.
Okay, so but if they don't use any of the resistant species, the corn or soybeans or canola, I mean, all three of these can sort of annihilate stuff if it's hot. So you're looking for some differences in symptomology and a few key differences. You know, if you look at the three of them, glyphosate kind of annihilates grasses. You rarely see grasses survive glyphosate. I think those came in late. I'm not sure what's going on there. You can see a little bit more coming through the Liberty. Typically, look at the glufosinate over here. So depending on how big the grasses are, with the glufosinate, you see some grasses that escape. Glufosinate's weak on barnyard grass and crabgrass, right? Whereas glyphosate and paraquat are really not weak on those species. Beyond that, you're looking for a couple other things. The glufosinate's weak on pigweeds, large pigweeds, and weak on lamb's quarter, right? Whereas the paraquat and the glyphosate really should take those out pretty well. If they throw you a bone like this is a glyphosate-resistant corn or soybean or canola, then you know you're way ahead, right? You kind of figure that out from what survived. But I mean, they can all be like scorched earth, or then you're starting to look for some differences. Now, glyphosate's an amino acid synthesis inhibitor, so it stops growth, causes a little bit of that yellowing and that distortion. Again, morning glory for these species can be a really nice indicator, but because it doesn't necessarily control it all. So you see some of the same type of stuff here. Don't be fooled by leaves that are just old enough that they've died, right? That's not symptomology, that's just the plant dying. So you're looking for, I had one right here, like this type of thing again. So if you're looking at the three of these thinking, okay, you know, it's like, I know it's one of these, and you see some of this suppressed growth, yellowing, a little bit of distortion, a couple different species can do it, that's going to be your glyphosate, right? You're not going to see that type of symptomology with a glufosinate and the paraquat. Trying to think of what else in this. You can see, you see a hair of a weakness here on velvet leaf, really with both of them. You may see it on the edge with the glyphosate. You can see the same type of yellowing and kind of thing here. So if you start to look on the fringe where the rate started to get reduced and you start to see some velvet leaf coming through, that may give you some symptomology. If you look at the glufosinate next to me here, you don't see any of that type of symptomology, but you do see, corn can be the other giveaway here too. This type of symptomology on the edge of the glufosinate plot on the corn, right? So it's glyphosate annihilates corn, right? And what you see with glyphosate, if it's not dead, is a purpling, right? Stunning, maybe a little bit of yellowing down in there if it's hanging on by a thread. You can see the glufosinate was good on the corn too, but you don't see that type of thing where you get over to the edge, it's not stunted really, right? You know, except for right the first plant, and then you see this sort of tissue destruction. I'm blanking on the site of action. Ammonium synthase inhibitor, what is it? Yeah, right. Which causes that damage, right? So it's kind of sort of a bleaching, but then you're typically going to see some other necrosis on the leaves there somewhere. You see it here, you see it through there. You don't really see any of the yellowing or distortion. You've just got some destruction of tissue. And then the paraquat, where's the paraquat? Yeah, it's on down. Let's go down to the paraquat. We'll come back then. To the paraquat. All right. Paraquat, you can see, kind of looks sort of similar. Should have taken everything out. Actually, you got some symptomology there. Kind of makes me a liar, doesn't it? That sort of looks like the same symptomology. But what you should see from the paraquat, if you've got surviving corn, is actual kind of spotting, or sort of a necrosis on the leaf, not just that kind of yellowing. Yeah, I'm not really seeing much. Yeah. In terms of one of the other indicator weeds here is nutsedge, where the glyphosate is slow on nutsedge, but typically gets it. Paraquat and glufosinate aren't very good on nutsedge. Glufosinate really weak on it typically. I'm trying to think of what else here. Again, if you're going to pick a species that gives you some nice symptomology, I think Morning Glory is another one where, if you look at the Morning Glory here, you don't see any of that glyphosate type growth suppression, yellowing, distortion, right? We're sort of old enough here, you almost don't see any plots, or everything worked fast enough. You don't really see any of the spotting symptomology anymore. But those three can be tough. Let's go back. Sharpen. So you've got 3 PPO inhibitors here. Post-emergence, you got the famecifin, the reflex, you got the sharpen, which is saflufenicil, and AIM sulfentrazone. So you're looking for some key differences. I mean, just kind of the overview here is sharpen's a foliar applied, a burn down, and a pre-emergence herbicide, but it's out here post-emergence. So as you look at these plots, reflex is a soybean herbicide, sulfentrazone's a soybean and corn herbicide, and then the saflufenicil in the middle there, which isn't labeled for things post, you can see it annihilated both the corn and beans when it won from a foliar application, right? So what you should see here is from the famecifin, safe on beans, although here's your sort of typical, right, PPO inhibitor symptomology on bean leaves, which you may see on the edge. You may see it, in this case it's down below, and the beans have actually taken off because we've had good growing conditions, and you see that down below. And you should see that possibly with the sulfentrazone. You can see the burning on the corn, right? The PPO symptoms on the corn. You probably won't see it dead. It'll probably be hanging on about like that, but it can be sort of all over the board. Doesn't have grass activity to speak of, neither does the sulfentrazone. You can see the saflufenicil in the middle sort of suppressing grasses a little bit. And then the famecifin across the board is, the sulfentrazone is labeled on a lot of different minor crops, right? So you can see like the canola, that may be your other key difference. See the canola and the sulfentrazone 2 plots down, surviving. You got the canola here and the saflufenicil plot dead. And over here you see it dead in the famecifin plot as well. Famecifin gives up pigweed, velvet leaf. Where's the velvet leaf? Yeah, you can see the velvet leaf sort of half surviving. And if you're trying to figure out the difference between the saflufenicil and the sulfentrazone and the famecifin, sulfentrazone is known for its velvet leaf control. That's why people use it. Should not be a velvet leaf surviving. Or as you come back over here to the famecifin, you got some velvet leaf surviving. The pigweed are largely gone. They're both about, neither one of them are that good on lamb's quarter, but the sulfentrazone's a little bit better. And then also Morning Glory could be a difference. And Morning Glory for both of these is one that's a little bit all over the board depending on how hot it was and things like that. Here you see the famecifin took out the Morning Glory pretty well. The saflufenicil did. And then actually all 3 of them did. A couple other species, sulfentrazone's weak on common ragweed. Trying to think of other differences. Sulfentrazone, this is kind of an interesting plot behind Bruce here. So the sulfentrazone, you know, the famecifin's not labeled for corn, so you see the damage. You see the saflufenicil kind of annihilating both of them. The sulfentrazone is labeled for both corn and beans, but it's hot on both of them, right? And it was here. So depending on rate and some things like that, you could see not a lot of symptomology, and you can be looking at it and thinking, man, you know, it's a PPO inhibitor, but it kind of hammered the corn and beans and it shouldn't have done this. And that may be your sulfentrazone. Whereas, you know, the fomesaphine is going to reliably kind of burn corn pretty well. Velvet leaf can be a key here between the fomesaphine, I think I said that, and the sulfentrazone. I don't remember seeing saflufenicil outpost in this screen before, really, but saflufenicil is primarily a broadleaf herbicide, you can see there, and in that situation got it annihilated everything pretty well except the grass. Yeah. I'm trying to think of what else would...
Can I make a note about the saflufenicil really quick?
Yeah.
The notes on the sheet say that it's fine on corn, soybeans, and wheat. That's true when it's sprayed pre.
Right.
This is sprayed post, and it is a post this year, so
And that's why everything's dead.
it is not labeled for that.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yep. So yeah, it's basically, and we use it in a burn down herbicide in beans, and then it has to go pre-plant in both crops, so you can see what it did there post.
Yeah, it's the first time we've done it.
Okay, so it took basically everything out and except the grass and suppressed it. I'm trying to think what you'd confuse it with. Maybe nothing. It may be the only herbicide here that kind of annihilated the broadleaf set effectively across the board and pretty much left the grass and caused some symptomology, right? Okay.
Maybe an easy one.
Yeah, it might be actually, yeah. Okay. We talked about paraquat, and then these last two, you really should see some symptomology with these, and it's just a matter of figuring out which one it is, right? They're bleaching herbicides. You see the white, right? You should, I think you should see some white somewhere. So the difference between these two, and this is a lot of activity for the topramazone, like a lot of activity. The difference is that the mesotrione has no activity on grasses, except you can see they're suppressed a little bit, and it does have pretty good activity on crabgrass sometimes, right? So that can be your key thing. They're both across the board fairly similar besides that, but we consider them fairly similar. They annihilated the beans here. They're both generally very safe on corn. You see a little symptomology, but this white's your giveaway. And then the difference between the two, once you know you're in the bleaching category, is the pramazone's got pretty good grass activity, and again, the mesotrione essentially has none except crabgrass. They're pretty good on the rest of the broadleaves. In this case, you can see the topramazone left the morning glory and the mesotrione took it out. I'm not sure that's a reliable indicator, but they're both pretty good across the board. The other thing, of course, is you can see the difference in the sorghum here because of the difference in grass activity between the two. So I think that for me, you know, it's possible you won't see any symptomology, but I think you probably will. And then I think, you know, just remember the difference in the grass control.